Namaste. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting but a very unknown chapter of our Indian history. And we are going to talk about the Dashrajanya War or the Dashrajanya Yuddh. I'll keep on speaking in Hindi as well as English so that people of both the languages can understand me clearly, because some of you might not be understanding either of the two languages. So what is this Dashrajanya War about? Basically, this war was between one king on one side and 10 or other kings on the other side. Great. So what's so special about it? We've been having so many wars in our ancient Indian history for the thousands of years. Wait. The one special thing about this war is that this was the Bap of all wars, or if I can say, it was even grander than Mahabharata. I'm not saying that in terms of scale, but the Dashrajanya War actually gave shape to our civilization. Very less is known about this particular war, and only a handful of mandals, maybe I think mandal number 3, mandal number 7 or mandal number 8 of Rig Veda talk about this war, which supposedly happened nearly 5,000 years ago. So the story so happened that on one side was King Sudas, Raja Sudas, who was a Puru Bharata, and on the other side there were 9 or 10 other kings, namely they belonged to various tribes like Yadu or Anu and Valhiks and those kinds of people, right? I'll give you the names of those people, those tribes later on in the video. So King Sudas was a Puru Bharata. He was from a sub-tribe of the Puru dynasty or the Puru lineage. We know that Puru was one of the 5 sons of King Yayati, and it was Puru who later on inherited the kingdom of Yayati and then formed the Pauravas. So King Sudas was a part of this dynasty. His kingdom ranged between Yamuna and the 5 rivers of the modern day Punjab. So you can say that his kingdom was largely in the Punjab-Haryana territory or the region today of India and a part of Pakistan. Now he was encircled by many other tribes, like, as I said, Yadus and the Alinas and the Anus and the Druhyus, and there were a few other tribes as well. Now mind you, the Yadus and the Druhyus, they were also kind of blood brothers to Sudasu. If you remember, apart from Puru, the other brothers were Yadu, Druhyu, Turvasu, and one more brother. So all these brothers, all these dynasties of these brothers had ganged up against Sudas because they were probably jealous of his stature and they wanted to crush him. So there were a series of battles. There was a series of battles between these two warring parties, and ultimately Sudas won. One battle that happened was on the banks of Ravi. Ravi, as we know, flows through Jammu Kashmir and then through Punjab and then merges into the Indus. So there was one battle on the banks of Ravi. The other battle took place on the banks of Yamuna. These were the 2 important battles in a series of battles in this great war, and ultimately Sudas won. So what happened actually? So what was the net result of this war? There were 2 important results of this war. One was that the defeated tribes, they fled away from modern India and they began living in other parts of the world. So for example, the Parshus, which were one of the antagonists or the enemies of Sudas, they migrated towards the modern day Iran, and that's how perhaps the name Persia came. Likewise, the Druhyus, they fled towards Germany, and even today you will find the Druids, which many people consider are a derivative of Druhyus, living in Germany and that part of Europe. Similarly, the Alinas and the Anus went in other parts of Asia, particularly Central Asia or Europe. Many such tribes went to Afghanistan. Some of them went to Anatolia. Some of them went to Turkey. Some of them went to Babylon, Mesopotamia. In fact, the earliest dynasties of Iraq or the Assyrians are considered to be the Asuras, and they are also considered to be the derivatives of these enemies of Sudas. So this is how the migration, the reverse migration happened from India to the rest of the world. And this theory is actually contrary to the Aryan Invasion Theory, which is propagated by so many Indic researchers who do not have knowledge of the Vedas. And they think that there was a class of people called Aryans who came from northwest or who came from Central Asia, and then they conquered the Dasas in the Harappa Valley, and then they established their kingdoms. Nothing could be farther from truth. In fact, Sudas's name himself ends with Das, and one of his ancestors was Devodas. Devodas, in fact, had conquered Shambar. Shambar was an Asura king living on the Himalayas, and the Vedas say that Shambar had 99 forts which were destroyed by Devodas. So it's incorrect that the Vedas, that the so-called Aryans came from northwest and occupied the Indo-Gangetic valley of India. Rather, it is the opposite. People spread from the Punjab-Haryana plains and then started living in other parts of the world. Here we need to look at Vedas as not just as a philosophical text. Yes, Vedas do consider a lot, comprise a lot of philosophy, but at the same time, Vedas are also a rich source of knowledge, history. And in fact, the earlier part of Rig Veda is largely about the Puru Bharats, and the later part of Rig Veda is largely about all the Purus. And each of those mandals of Rig Veda, or even Samved or Yajurved or Atharved, is composed by a rishi, or in some cases by a raja. And all these rishis and rajas were historical figures. You can find their names not just in Rig Veda, but you can also find their names in Purana and Upanishads. So what is the proof that the people, the Anus, the Alinas, the Parshus, the Druhyus, the Yadus, and so many other people like the Bhalinas, they went from India and started living in other parts of the world? What is the proof? Well, you can also look up. आप अफगानिस्तान और ईरान की भी हिस्ट्री को अगर आप देखें तो उनके जो पुराने ग्रंथ हैं, जैसे अवेस्ता हुआ, या अफगानिस्तान के भी जो वहाँ के जो ऐतिहासिक ग्रंथ हैं, वो इन जातियों को आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं. दे आइडेंटिफाई दीज जातिस, दीज क्लान्स और दीज सेक्ट्स और दीज ट्राइब्स. सो दैट्स अ सेपरेट मैटर. But there is a real historicity behind this particular war, as well as the people who took part in this Dashrajamya War. Now, the other result of this war was that after his win, Sudas and his armies expanded, went towards the east. They crossed the Yamuna, they entered the Doab, and later on they conquered the Ikshwakus. Even the Ikshwakus were also their blood brothers in a sense, because Yayati came from the Ikshwaku clan, and the Ikshwakus sprung from Vavaswat Manu, and Sudas was 40th in number from Vavaswat Manu. So it has always happened in the past that a younger dynasty has conquered an older dynasty. So in this case, this happened also. And then from East UP onwards, Sudas and his armies went towards Bihar and they conquered Magad. In fact, Rig Veda also talks about a kingdom called Kikat or Magad. Magad is talked about in a different word, Paragahunda or Paramagda, somewhat like this. But the word Kikat is very much there in Rig Veda. So Magad was conquered, and then after conquering Magad, he went eastwards further and conquered Bengal as well. So in the process, his culture or his thought process incorporated the philosophical traditions of the Ikshwakus, the Tantra practices of probably the East Bengal and the Bihar people. And then when his army swiveled towards South and Central India, then the concept of temple worship also came up. So this is how our Hinduism or our Hindu culture has shaped up over the past 5,000 years. Now let's talk about the historicity of this Dashrajamya War. Some scholars believe that this war happened somewhere in 2700 BC. Others say that it was in 2900 BC. So roughly it translates to around 5,000 years back. Now the major problem in this theory is that one of the helpers or one of the allies of Sudas was the grandson of the Hai king Sahasrabahu, right? And we know that Sahasrabahu and Ravan were contemporaries. In Ramcharitmanas, Hanuman taunts Ravan by saying that, hey, look, you were captured by Sahasrabahu and you were put in his armpit, so you are that weak. So Ravan and Sahasrabahu being contemporaries, how can it be possible that just 2 generations ago Sahasrabahu had fought with Ravan, and Ravan was a contemporary to Ram? So somewhere there's an incongruity, somewhere there's a confusion in these dates. So this part is this. Another thing is that even if we consider these dates to be true, and if we also consider Lord Ram also to be a historical figure, then let's go to that event when Lord Ram tries to cross the sea and go to Lanka. Now that event happened when there was a land bridge between Lanka and India. That land bridge vanished somewhere around 11 or 12,000 years back, geologically speaking. So this means that Lord Ram was present more than 14,000 years back from today. Okay. Now, but here Sudas is being talked of happening somewhere in 2700 BC. So there's a lot of confusion here, and we need to resolve that confusion. But what is more interesting is that this war happened, and this war is mentioned in Rig Veda, which is a historical text. Okay, we need to consider Rig Veda as a historical text and not just as a philosophical text alone. We need to question whatever is written in Rig Veda. And unfortunately, the biggest problem facing Hindus is that we consider Rig Veda as something as a poroshe or something which cannot be questioned. No, everything that's written by us humans has to be questioned. That's why we will find out about who we are. So I thought that I'll bring this topic of Dashrajanya Yuddha in front of you, and hopefully this video is helpful to you. And if you are keenly interested in this topic of Dashrajanya Yuddha, then you can also read the selected works of Conrad Elst or Shrikant Talageri. Besides, you can also do some Google research also, but Talageri and Elst have done a seminal work in this particular area. And then there are some Western scholars also who have made their own interpretations about the Rig Vedic texts on this war, as well as the historicity of Sudas, as well as the historicity of 2 other very important people in this entire event, which is Vishwamitra as well as Vasishtha. In fact, there's a controversy. There are some people who say that this war was actually a byproduct of the rivalry between Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. Apparently, Vishwamitra was the chief priest of Sudas in the earlier stages of the war, but when Sudas could not achieve success, then he banished Vishwamitra from his kingdom and brought in Vasishtha in his place. And then this rivalry between the 2 sages was played out in the later parts of this war. But this is just a theory, and but nevertheless it's a very interesting theory, and I would urge all of you to read up this Dashrajanya Yuddha war and form your own conclusions. If you liked it, please subscribe to my channel or like it, and I'll keep on coming up with more interesting stuff like this one. Thank you.